Gathering and organizing performance data for planning. Planning teams use data for a number of the processes that are part of the Unified Improvement Planning. Consider these uses of data in the UIP: reviewing current performance and prior year's targets, analyzing data to identify significant trends, prioritizing performance challenges, identifying root causes, identifying interim measures, identifying implementation benchmarks. What type of data would planning teams use for each? For reviewing current performance and prior year's targets, using state performance data. For analyzing data to identify significant trends, using state and local performance data. For prioritizing performance challenges, using state and local performance data. For identifying root causes, using local process and perception data. For identifying interim measures, using state and local performance data. For identifying implementation benchmarks, using local process and perception data. We can also think about these UIP processes as involving either looking back or looking forward. For now, we are going to focus on performance data. The state performance data that schools and districts are required to use as part of their planning processes includes student assessment results, administered at the state and local levels, graduation rates, and dropout rates. Before we start talking about performance data in any further detail, let's review a couple of key terms: measures and metrics. Check your understanding of the difference between measures and metrics by creating a T-chart with metric on one side and measure on the other. Then put the following terms under the appropriate heading: assessment instrument, end-of-year student data collection, doubles, access for ELLs, percent proficient or advanced, scale score, dropout rate, NWEA maps, acuity, ACT composite score, and median growth percentile. Pause this recording while you check your understanding. Please check your answers on this slide. What do we need to know about assessment results before we can use them as part of our planning processes? What is being measured by the assessment instrument? We want to make sure that the assessment instruments were measuring the learning we wanted to check on. What metrics or scores will be generated? For example, scale scores or performance levels. For what groups of students metrics will be available? Will we be able to get aggregated scores? If so, for which groups of students? What comparison points are available? What data is available to which we can compare our performance? When data is available, when the assessment results will be available to use in our planning processes? We'll talk about each of these questions next. How do we know the assessment instruments we are using measure the learning we care about? For most of the assessment results we would use for planning, someone else is checking on the accuracy of the instruments, in other words, the state assessment office or district assessment staff. When we use assessments selected and administered at the school level, answering this question becomes a critical first step toward ensuring we use local data appropriately. In general, assessment metrics are available at two levels: the individual and group level. Group level metrics are aggregates of individual metrics. They could be the mean, median, percent, or sum of individual metrics. Group metrics can be provided for different groups. For example, all students in the school or district, all students in a grade level, students in a disaggregated group, in other words, English language learners, and students in a classroom. Here are some examples of metrics at the individual and group levels. To make meaning of our performance data, we also need to have something to compare our data to. We call this a comparison point. Comparison points help us determine how good is good enough performance. We use comparison points for analyzing data and setting performance targets. Comparison points can be criterion or norm referenced. Criterion referenced comparison points help to answer the question, how did we compare to a specific expectation? Norm referenced comparison points help to answer the question, how did we compare to others? Sometimes scores embed a norm-referenced comparison within the score itself. This is the case with percentiles. A percentile score of 65 tells us that the student scored better than 65% of the other students who took the test. Here are some examples of comparison points. Criterion-referenced comparison points for state-required metrics include the minimum state expectations, or the value that receives a meets rating on the SPF or DPF. For example, a Colorado ACT composite score of 20. Norm-referenced comparison points for schools can include the district or statewide performance on the same metric. UIP processes facilitate and support inquiry into school and district performance and continuous improvement. These processes can be considered analogous to a research process. Preparing data can take as much or more time than analyzing it. The process of gathering and organizing data includes clarify purpose for which data was collected and determine if the purpose is aligned to how you plan to use the data, gather the data, consider the quality of the data source, specify what data is available, such as metrics, comparison points, and for which groups, and develop an analysis plan or path through the data. The timing of the availability of state and local assessment results determines when we can analyze this data. State assessment results are available once a year. Local assessment results should be available at various points throughout the school year. As part of their work for CDE, CTLT has created a tool that can give planning teams information about assessment resources that they may want to use as part of their improvement planning processes. These are assessment instrument descriptions. The assessment instrument description elements file explains what is included in each of the assessment instrument descriptions. The assessment instrument descriptions help planning teams to build background knowledge about assessment instruments used in a school, determine if the planned use for the assessment results align with the purpose of the instrument, clarify the individual and group metrics available, and identify comparison points. As you access and organize state and local assessment results for planning purposes, start by accessing the assessment instrument descriptions available on the CDE web page for any assessment results for which you will have access. This includes the following: K-3 reading interim assessments approved for district use to comply with the READ Act, access for ELLs, the 5 most commonly used interim assessments in Colorado, which are Acuity, Galileo, NWEA Maps, Scantron Performance Series, and STAR Math Enterprise and Reading Enterprise. One of the state-approved school readiness assessments, Teaching Strategies Gold, or also called TS Gold.